I'm David DeRozier, publisher of Real Clear Politics. It's my honor to stand in front of you, the future of American capitalism, and introduce you all to my friend, Andy Puzder, CEO of CKE Restaurants, AKA known as Carl's Jr. and Hardee's. Andy is a central casting example of what the Adam Smith Society hopes you'll all someday become. Self-conscious, public-spirited, articulate capitalists. Or as Evan put it this morning, Andy is a badass for capitalism. Today is a big day. In case you haven't recognized it, there's a presidential election going on. And today, South Carolina is going to the polls. Come tomorrow, there'll be a four-man race for the Republican nomination. I think it should be three. If interested in politics, I would recommend that you take a look at Real Clear. I hear good things about it. Also, today our nation is saying its final goodbyes to Antonin Scalia. I bring him up because in 1982, 4 years before Scalia was appointed by Ronald Reagan and confirmed by the Senate to the Supreme Court, a group calling themselves the Federalist Society opened their doors with the purpose of creating a pipeline of future judicial talent that would benefit our experiment in self-government. Long story short, they succeeded, and their success is the inspiration of the Adam Smith Society. The Manhattan Institute has a long history of consequentially defending the way of life you hope to someday have. The Adam Smith Society is here to give you an invitation to join them and to defend yourself. By creating the conditions, education, networking, as Andy will show a good example, they really do hope that we'll produce a cadre of people like Andy Puzder or Evan or be like Marilyn Fedak. On that day, I think the mission will be accomplished. Andy is an extraordinary businessman. He took an aging company and brand, lost in a crowded, competitive marketplace, and gave it a forever young, manly, cutting-edge, politically incorrect image. Andy, I love your Carl's Jr. commercials. If the most interesting man alive was to kind of sit down and have a burger with his occasional Dos Equis, I think it would be a Carl's Jr. burger. If I was to guess where Andy leans politically, I would kind of peg him as a Rubio guy. However, I think most of your customers are breaking for Trump right now. You might want to think of what's going on in that special sauce of yours. Andy came on Real Clear's radar screen when a friend sent us a link of a piece that he wrote on his own website, kind of going into the unintended but necessary consequences of Obamacare. It was pitch perfect, the model of public persuasion, and since then he's become a Real Clear staple. Between us, the problem of you want to be one percenters is that you're timid, and I understand why you are timid. You want to be rich, so you don't stand up and make the public case for what you do and its public benefits. My opinion, and again, this is off the record, that Bernie Sanders of the world will come for you regardless, whether you're quiet or not. So I think it's best to be like Andy, or be like Evan, or be like Marilyn. Make the case for what you do. Stand up and show your intelligence. Make the case, the case for the invisible hand visible. Andy is both rich and brave, and I hope you'll let his example inspire you and do more for your own defense. And when you're ready, we look forward to having you on Real Clear. Thank you, Andy.
All right, thank you, David, for that generous introduction, and I'll try and live up to my badass reputation now that you've established it. I also want to thank the Manhattan Institute and the Adam Smith Society for giving me the opportunity to be here today to discuss the importance of free market capitalism, an economic system that truly has lifted more people out of poverty and created more freedom and prosperity than any system ever devised. It's a particular honor to do so before young men and women who belong to a society or considering a society named for that system's founding father, Adam Smith. As David mentioned, I'm Andy Puzder, CEO of CKE Restaurants, which you'll know as Carl's Jr. if you're from the West. If you're from the East, from the Midwest or Southeast, you'll know it as Hardee's. If you're even in New York now, we have a couple restaurants and a couple in New Jersey. By training, I'm an attorney. I went to Washington University in St. Louis. I became CEO about 15 years ago because this company was failing and heading towards bankruptcy, and they said, let's see if the cocky lawyer can fix it. But due to a team effort and an entrepreneurial approach, we're doing very well today. Now, while I'm a CEO and an attorney, I did not grow up rich. I grew up in a working class family from Cleveland, Ohio. My first job where I got a paycheck was scooping ice cream at Baskin-Robbins for about $1 an hour, which was then the prevailing minimum wage. I worked my way through college and law school without government or family assistance. By painting houses, cutting lawns, busting up concrete with a jackhammer in St. Louis in the middle of the summer. For those of you from St. Louis, you'll know how unpleasant that was. Really, I worked all sorts of jobs, and I was always grateful to have the work and never felt that any of this work was below me. But I grew up in a different time with different attitudes. I was a kid in the 50s and the 60s and was always taught that I could be whatever I wanted to be if I was willing to do the work. I was never told that other people had more than they deserved or that we had less than we deserved. My dad supported our family as a car salesman. He sold Fords. When I was about 10, he took me with him, that's about 1960. I went with him to deliver a car to a very wealthy individual in a very wealthy area, kind of Downton Abbey wealthy, in a place called Hunting Valley, Ohio, Gates Mills. We pulled through the ornate gate, and I saw this huge, beautiful house that really dwarfed the little ranch house that the 5 of us lived in. And as my dad drove past it, I asked why he didn't stop. And he told me it was the guest house. We then drove by these imposing stables that were really far more impressive than the little ranch house we lived in. Horses and guys in livery in those dark woods. And I didn't know what I was going to see next. So we finally pulled up to the main house, which was just stunning. We walked up to the main entrance, and surprisingly, Mr. Humphrey, who owned all of this, came to the door himself, took the keys, thanked my dad, and gave my dad the keys for his trade-in. So we're walking back. I'm dumbfounded. This incredible wealth that surrounded me. And so we walked back to the car. And I asked my dad, what does Mr. Humphrey do? My dad said he's a lawyer and he owns a business. And I can still remember thinking, a lawyer. I could be a lawyer. So I looked at my dad and asked, what's a lawyer? But the notion that it mattered what percent we were in, or that Mr. Humphrey had so much wealth while we had so little, never even occurred to me. What occurred to me was I could do that. Now, there's never been a nation where a working class kid like me could aspire to that level of success with any realistic chance of achieving it. And I want to talk to you about why I felt that way and why it was important and the depth of the tragedy that will ensue if we lose that attitude. So let's start what brought about the biggest material change to the human condition in history, Adam Smith's free market capitalism. This will be a general overview. It'll have the problems that come with generalities, but I think it sets the context for understanding the incredible positive power of free markets and individual liberty, as well as the destructive nature and the destructive power of consolidating power into the hands of a few individuals through the oppressive force of government. Now, prior to the 18th century, economic power was essentially limited to landed aristocrats or urban patricians who controlled the government. Concepts of liberty and freedom were intended to protect their privileges against the increasing privileges or increasing power of absolute monarchs. Those with power maintained a level of freedom for themselves while subjugating the majority of the population, if necessary, by force. Generally, these systems were based on military conquest. You won the war, you parceled out the land to your supporters, and thus they ruled as aristocrats with little or no concern for the masses. Aristocrats owned the land produced wealth. There simply weren't enough jobs for everyone, and people generally either found a trade like blacksmith, joined the military, joined a religious order, worked the land as serfs, or starved. Now, as oppressive as this economic system was, there simply wasn't a system that was capable of feeding everybody, much less allowing people to improve their lives or even imagine a better life or a better future for themselves or their children. Then came capitalism. Artisan shops, which had previously catered to the privileged classes, became factories, catering to the masses, many of whom were now employed in those very factories. Capitalism and the Industrial Revolution are often criticized for mass production, but it's important to keep in mind it was mass production for all, rather than limited production for the wealthy, consumers, not ruling aristocrats, would make decisions through their collective purchasing power that would guide the economy, determining whether one business succeeded and another failed. The serving class, the peasant class, became the consumer class. And those who ran the economic engines now became subject to the desires of that greatly expanded consumer class. Henry Ford didn't build Fords for aristocrats. He built them for the masses. Steve Jobs, over a century later, he didn't build iPhones for aristocrats. He made them for the masses. Rather than impoverished masses catering solely to a ruling elite who controlled society's economic benefits, the ruling elite were now concerned with finding the best way to please the masses. Over time, the slaves and the serfs disappeared. They became patrons, buyers, consumers, who in an economic form of democracy voted with every dollar they spent, no longer restrained by the whims of an aristocratic hierarchy that believed it was entitled to rule due to its superior intellect and birth. By unleashing the will to succeed, capitalism encouraged innovation across a broad spectrum of society, with people from every walk of life striving to come up with the next great idea, the next great service or product that consumers couldn't live without. It also increased productivity, making work pay, and vastly increasing the number and value of jobs. Adam Smith's invisible hand was lifting more people from poverty to prosperity than the oppressive fist of government ever had. In the United States, the release of this dynamic entrepreneurial energy resulted in the most innovative society the world has ever known, creating more wealth and spreading it across broader demographics than any nation ever had. In 1776, as you all know, 13 colonies, 13 backward colonies by world standards at the time, rebelled against a ruling aristocracy because of government economic oppression. By 1885, within merely 110 years, these backward colonies became the world's largest economy, proving the thesis of Adam Smith's seminal work, The Wealth of Nations. Now think about the difference that this created for common men and women. My grandfather grew up impoverished in the Austro-Hungarian Empire just before World War I, where a ruling class of aristocrats still controlled all economic benefits, where consumers' desires were irrelevant, if not disdained, and where the opportunity to improve your position was non-existent. His future held little opportunity to be anything other than a peasant, lucky to eke out a living as a serf beholden to a landed aristocrat. As a teenager, he left and came to America. He died having fulfilled his dream of owning his own home and having 2 children with high school educations. Small dreams by today's standards, huge dreams at the time. His grandson, me, started his career scooping ice cream at Baskin-Robbins, saw no barriers to his dreams of a better future, and became a lawyer who now runs an international corporation. But for the economic opportunities of our free market economy, which drew my grandfather like a magnet to leave his home and his family for a better life while still a teenager, I'd probably be a bald and toothless farmer sitting on a porch in Slovakia today, rather than here addressing this great group of students. There's never been a nation or an economic system that offered millions of people, like my grandfather, the opportunity to make a better life for themselves and for their families, that opened the door to success solely based on the commitment to give an honest day's work for an honest day's pay, or where success was determined not by your birth, but by your desire to work harder, longer, or smarter than the next guy. Another person who took advantage of this opportunity, and to whom I owe a great debt, was named Carl Karcher. Carl was a bread truck driver from Ohio with an 8th grade education and a belief in the American dream. In 1941, he and his wife Margaret borrowed $315 and bought a hot dog cart and started a business on a street corner in South Central Los Angeles. That $315 investment has grown into CKE Restaurants. CKE stands for Carl Karcher Enterprises. The international corporation has been my privilege to lead for the past 15 years. With a system that today employs close to 100,000 people worldwide and generated over $4 billion in system-wide sales last year and over 3,600 Carl's Jr. and Hardee's quick service restaurants in 44 states and 37 countries. That's countries as diverse as Russia, China, Vietnam, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Brazil, Mexico, Kazakhstan, India, Iraq, Australia, New Zealand, Denmark, and Turkey. This year will open in Japan and Cambodia. All from a $315 investment in a hot dog cart and a belief that if in America, if you had the will to succeed, you'd have the opportunity. So what are we doing with this incredible gift of a free enterprise system that gives everybody the ability to dream big and the potential to succeed beyond those dreams? Well, over the past 6 years, we've seen a disturbing move away from individual responsibility and reliance on free markets to a dependence on government. Whenever government expands, individual freedom contracts. When government takes power, it takes it from somewhere or someone. That someone is you. Whenever government gives you something, it takes something from you, your independence and your freedom. So why do people want to expand government power and diminish this incredible free enterprise system? Well, some are well-intended. They believe government can be a force for good, and government certainly serves a role. The Constitution's preamble states that our government was formed to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. But we shouldn't ignore the reality that government inevitably falls under the control of people who view themselves as an elite group, better able to make decisions for us because they believe we are incapable of making those kinds of decisions for ourselves or for society. They would take Adam Smith's invisible hand, the millions of consumers guiding economic growth and innovation, and replace it with the very visible fist of government. Rather than the guiding hand lifting people up, they prefer the rough and destructive fist of government, knocking dreamers and doers down. Over the last 7 years, this very visible fist has been particularly destructive. We've seen $800 billion in so-called government stimulus spending, putting money in the hands of businesses and individuals that the government selected. Now, that's something the government does very poorly. Think about Solyndra or Fisker. The promised economic growth never materialized. GDP has stagnated at about 2%. Government spending on projects to infuse cash into the economy really created nothing real or permanent. The problem is businesses don't invest in growth tomorrow based on temporary government benefits today. Think about cash for clunkers. But what about infrastructure investments? Well, while investment in infrastructure is both a proper function of government and very necessary, at best, it's a very temporary driver of growth. Businesses obviously need roads and bridges to get goods to market, and people obviously need them to get to their jobs. Politicians hoping to show at least some short-term economic growth often find these projects very appealing. But you don't build roads and bridges to create jobs. That's field of dreams economics, build it and they will come. You build roads and bridges because people have jobs, and businesses need to get goods to market. It's American workers and businesses that create the need for roads and bridges, as well as the tax dollars to pay for them. You create a sustainable job by building a business, not a bridge. We've also seen the effects of Dodd-Frank legislation intended to regulate the financial sector, but resulting in massive closures of community banks, unable to afford the cost of compliance. Those are the very banks that small businesses depend upon for growth. And the economy, in turn, depends on those small businesses for its growth. Obamacare, where do I start? Still unpopular with its mandates and penalties, oppressing business growth. It's rapidly entering a death spiral as the economic assumptions upon which it was based collapse. The brutal truth is that the American economy has experienced a discouragingly anemic recovery since the Great Recession ended. While the 6 other recoveries since 1960 averaged 4% GDP growth, and the Obama administration promised 4% GDP growth if Congress approved the $800 billion in stimulus spending, economic growth has averaged a paltry 2%. That means catching up to pre-recession employment levels has been agonizingly slow. After more than 6 years of recovery, 4.3 million more people are working now than were working when the Great Recession began in December of 2007. But the employable population, It's increased by 19 million people. That's over 4 times the number of people who found jobs. Perhaps more disturbing, only 1.5 million of those who found jobs found full-time jobs. In other words, about 2/3 of those people are working part-time. Now, a part-time job may well be the path to a career, but there needs to be a career at the end of the path. With anemic economic growth and business closures exceeding business startups throughout the Obama presidency, that's the first time that's ever happened. Careers are in short supply. The labor force participation rate, I know you're all business students, but that's the percentage of people working or actively looking for work. That's been below 63% for 22 consecutive months. It was last as low as 63% over 37 years ago when Jimmy Carter was president and before women entered the labor force in large numbers. It was at 62.7% in January. Now keep this in mind when you hear the Obama administration officials tout how the unemployment rate has declined. For purposes of the official unemployment rate, people who are working part-time, let's say as little as 2 hours a week, are considered fully employed, even if they're working that job solely because they can't find a full-time job. BLS reported, Bureau of Labor Statistics reported, that in January, 6 million people were working part-time because they couldn't find full-time jobs. For purposes of calculating the unemployment rate, they were considered fully employed. But those who've given up, even those who've given up work, if you've given up work, looking for work for just 30 days, all right, that's what, when you say people working or actively looking for work means you've looked in the past month. If you haven't looked in 30 days, you're not counted as unemployed, even if you want a job, and even though you clearly are unemployed. Say in January, 6 million people who wanted a job now were deemed not in the labor force. So we're not considered unemployed, even though they clearly were unemployed. Now, my point is that because of how the official unemployment rate is calculated, it's a very unrealistic indicator of economic health when labor participation is declining, as it has been since President Obama took office. The problem is that people who would rely on big government instead of free markets simply do not understand how jobs and careers are created and end up relying on these irrelevant statistics. Their assumptions seem to be that jobs will be there no matter what they do to expand government and impede the ability of businesses to grow. Now, clearly, over the last 7 years, we've learned that just isn't the case. It's American businesses that create jobs, and let's talk about how for a minute. Let's use CKE restaurants for an example, just because it's a business that I'm very familiar with. We're over 90% franchised. That means small business owners own most of our restaurants. Our franchisees create entry-level jobs and management careers every time they open a Carl's Jr. or a Hardee's restaurant, as you would imagine. After opening, each restaurant creates about 25 permanent self-sustaining jobs within the restaurant itself. But the job-creating impact of our restaurants is felt far beyond the restaurant itself. Franchisees generally invest more than $1 million to permit, build, and equip restaurants, creating jobs for architects, attorneys, construction workers, and equipment manufacturers. Our approximately 3,000 domestic restaurants spend over $1 billion every year on food and paper products. That creates jobs from the farmers who plant the seeds to the drivers who deliver those products to our restaurants. We also spend $175 million a year on advertising. That's great for actors and workers at ad agencies, and I know David likes the actors and actresses in our ads, as well as the radio and TV stations. We spend $150 million annually on capital improvements, remodeling restaurants and purchasing new equipment. That spurs opportunities for construction workers, equipment manufacturers, and more. Then there's roughly $100 million that we put towards annual maintenance, providing jobs for window washers, air conditioner repair people, and landscapers. These workers in turn spend their incomes on food, clothing, housing, medical care, education, and entertainment, supporting even more jobs. The more restaurants we build, the more jobs and the more growth we create in local communities. Collectively with our franchisees, CKE provides employment directly for more than 75,000 people just in the United States. And we support jobs for tens of thousands of others outside of our restaurant that you don't see when you go to the restaurant. Think of these ancillary jobs as concentric circles of job creation that emanate from each of our restaurants. This incredible engine of economic growth applies to every part of the American economy, whether it's Ford or Apple or Caterpillar or Walmart or Coca-Cola. The web of job creation is the same, and it's overlapping. So if a politician wants to solve the problem of too few jobs or too much income inequality for working class Americans, limiting their path to the middle class, the solution is very simple. Help businesses add jobs by simplifying the tax code, enacting regulatory reform, and getting government out of the way. Make it easy to create jobs, and American entrepreneurs will take it from there. American workers have experienced meaningful job and wage growth, have not experienced meaningful job or wage growth for the past 6 years because the Obama administration did not pursue a free market path dependent on Adam Smith's invisible hand, guided by American consumers and businesses. They chose the fist of government by choosing to increase both regulation and taxes while using government bureaucrats to allocate resources. Their approach has caused American workers to suffer through the feeblest economic recovery since the Great Depression. And we stand here today weakened economically should another financial crisis arise. Free market capitalism has allowed us to build the single greatest engine of growth and shared prosperity that the world has ever known. Free enterprise enables all of us to both dream big and fulfill those dreams, but we must allow it to work its wonders, to create opportunity and foster innovation. We should never succumb to the idea that a small group of elites, however they're chosen, can create our futures for us. As Friedrich Hayek, another brilliant economist, said, that's the road to serfdom. That's the very road my grandfather came to the United States to avoid. History's shown there's only one road to empower consumers, inspire innovation, create opportunity for all, and restore America's economic vitality, and that's Adam Smith's free enterprise capitalist system. Now, this kind of freedom imposes an obligation on business leaders to act honorably, to be conscious of the bottom line, but to be fair. Good employees are the bedrock of America's economy. Remember, when you're out there, that it's possible to be successful and to be good. May God bless each one of you, and may God bless the last and greatest stand for economic freedom and individual liberty, the United States of America. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think I'm taking questions, right? I am taking questions. Was that badass enough for you, David? Okay, anybody? Here, this young man.
Dustin Stewart, University of Texas. Hayek also...
Where are you? Oh, there you are, okay.
Hayek also supported a basic living wage. How do you square that with something we thought? I mean, he's tripping as a very free market person, but he was also very clear that he supports basic living wage. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, nobody wants to pay something that isn't a living wage, but the problem is that...
No, I mean, not minimum wage, like give people money.
You mean like earned income tax credit?
No, physically giving them money.
Well, look, I don't...
Like
you guys aren't old enough to have children, but when you do, please don't just give them money. You know, I've got 6 kids, and they're all fairly successful at this point. You can't... You know, giving people, my grandfather didn't come to this country so people would give him money. You know, I didn't decide to be a lawyer and decide to go to college and law school because I thought people were going to give me money. You know, giving people money doesn't really help. What you get personal satisfaction out of is what you earn. Now, I don't know if your parents or the government helped any of you to get through college. I assume that they did. Are you proud of that fact? Or are you proud of the fact that you got out of college and that you're going to make something of it? You're going to earn something in your life, that you'll have earned success. Because if you think money makes you happy, then you don't have any rich friends. Because the most unhappy people, I've got a friend whose father's very famous. He's always had all the money he wanted, a lot of opportunities in Hollywood. He just got a divorce. He's got 4 kids. He's drug addicted, and he's an alcoholic. And this guy's talented, good-looking, intelligent, but he never had to do anything. You can't succeed if you can't fail. Failure is an opportunity. The only time you'll feel good about something in your life is if you have the chance to fail at it and you don't fail. That's what will make you a stronger, more. So look, there are people who need money. Let me step back. We've got people, if there are people who are starving, people who need medical care, I mean, there are people who really suffer in this world, and we should definitely have a safety net to save them. But we can't raise the safety net so high that we discourage people from working and earning success and being happy and getting contentment out of their lives, which is what socialism does. I wish you could, I visited, this is a long answer to your question, I'm probably going to run over my time, but I visited Hungary, and Austria and Hungary pretty soon after Reagan was president. And Austria, where the United States went in after World War II, it was wonderful. It was clean. People were thriving. Everybody had, it looked really good. You went over to Budapest, and I mean, the guys my age were all depressed. Their eyes were blank. It was just because they spent their life on vodka. The kids who were your age at that time, people that were all over me. How do you start a restaurant? How do we get out? What can we do? What can we do to make ourselves better? That's what you want to encourage, not that stare of distress and despair. Yes.
Hi, sir. Greg Morrison.
See, this is a problem. You get me started, you really can't stop me. I'm sorry.
I wanted to ask whether you thought there is any role for the government in terms of higher education funding or job training, and if so, how to best do that, because you are obviously very proud of the fact that you went through school without any government assistance, but whether you think to make sure there's a competitive workforce with other nations, whether the government should be doing any funding for job training or education.
That's a question that will, again, require a very long answer. But let me say that I think one of the big problems, there was a gentleman up here this morning who was very articulate on education, but I'd like to add something to what he said. I'm on the board of the law school at Washington University, and I can tell you one of the big problems with education is that the government has been lending money to students, and students have been accepting those loans, and as the students get the money, they're really basically, students are shovels, so they shovel the money to the schools. Schools keep raising tuition, they keep raising teachers, professors, administrators' pay. Everything keeps getting more expensive to the point now where we've got a crisis because students have all realized it isn't worth it to get this education. I shouldn't borrow all this money. I'm not going to be able to pay it back. And this is because government has gotten involved to an extent it was not involved when I was in school. You could get a government guaranteed loan, but you got it from a bank. You didn't get it from the government. And there were, so that we didn't have this great inflation in tuition. I think we need, and I have not endorsed any political candidate, but I'm only saying that because David mentioned Marco Rubio, and I'm about to mention Marco Rubio. He does talk about the apprentice programs. That's not what he calls them. What's he call them? Vocational training. Thank you. I think vocational training is very important. I think it's something, we've lost a ton of high-paying working-class jobs through free trade, which I'm in favor of, but we should be a little more careful how we do it. A lot of jobs have gone to China and Mexico, including 5 million manufacturing jobs since 1996. We're 5 million manufacturing jobs down since 96. The employable population's increased by 50 million people. And then you've got jobs that are taken in this country by people that may not be here legally, such as in construction. I had a buddy who just had his house remodeled, and it was a lot of people who may not have been here legally. And so you've really squeezed the working class in a way that's probably not appropriate. Young man.
Hi, good afternoon, Obin Okani, Wake Forest University. So you implored us to be honorable businessmen and women. I wanted to know, is there a suggested accountability metric that you may suggest, or something that's out there to actually see this ideal through?
I don't have anything specifically that I can recommend you to. I think many people have religious faith, and I think it's very, very good to keep the tenets of your religious faith in mind. But I wouldn't dictate to anybody that they should or need to be religious in order to be ethical. I think you know when you're stealing from people, you know when you're taking something unfairly from people, and you should never do that as an employer. You should try and make sure, if you make sure your employees are well taken care of, they'll make sure you're well taken care of. We have franchisees, as I told you, and my business philosophy, which I tell the franchisees all the time, is if the franchisees make money, we all make money. I mean, you have to be conscious of the needs and desires of the people who work for you or with you. And, don't steal, don't lie, don't deceive. I mean, it's the basic tenets that I think you can find just about anywhere. Yes.
My name is Ken Kronberg from the University of Texas, and The agricultural business gets tremendous subsidies from the government, from both parties. And I mean, this is a serious question. What percentage of the ingredients that your company uses are sourced from businesses that are not receiving these subsidies or handouts?
I have absolutely no idea. I don't even know how I would determine that. Obviously, the products go from the field to the company that manufactures them, and I'm sure they mix things together that have subsidies and don't have subsidies. But I don't believe the government should subsidize industries. I don't know why we would be subsidized. I'm not a crony capitalist. I oppose crony capitalism. We are not dependent on the government at our company for any particular benefits. So I don't really think American businesses should be. Yes.
Hey, Matt Richmond, Ken Flagler. One of the sort of critiques against free market capitalism is that you need a level playing field, make it easy for everyone to be able to compete. What's the best way to make sure that's a possibility to let people improve their position?
Actually, I think keeping a level playing field is a function of government. I think the Securities and Exchange Commission is a wise thing. People like me should not be able to invest based on the fact that I know things that you don't know about the business. So I think that government does have a role to play in keeping the field level. The problem is when you empower government to keep things level, they inevitably tilt it. And it inevitably gets tilted towards whichever side's in power, trying to gain political benefit from the tilting so people will vote for them. And I think we are really tilted right now. We're in a very, very bad and dangerous situation where the function of government has been abused. And in fact, its legitimate function under the Constitution has all but been ignored. And we need to restore our constitutional frame of government, limited government, individual liberty, economic freedom. That's what will turn this country around.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, sir, my name's Ben from the University of Pennsylvania.
Hey, Ben.
Thanks for your remarks. Your candor was refreshing.
Glad to do it.
What are some other business leaders or executives that you personally respect and look up to?
God, there are a lot of business executives that I respect that run, and I hate to pick anybody out in particular. One guy that you have to admire, and he's passed on, so I don't mind mentioning him, is Steve Jobs. I mean, and even forgetting his political beliefs, this is a guy who said, we have this great product, and his people internally told him, well, people don't like it, and he said, well, how do they know they don't like it? They don't even know what it is yet. So really went out and pushed and forwarded his beliefs and became a real, there probably isn't a person in this room who doesn't right now have something that has something to do with Apple. I do. I've got my Apple, despite what Donald Trump would like me to do. I have my iPhone. There are so many. I mean, the guy that just took over at McDonald's has done a great job turning that company around. They've gotten their sales positive. He didn't do what I would have done, but I respect the fact that he did what succeeded. There's a lot of Mort Zuckerman out of New York, I think, is another really, really great businessman who I have a lot of respect for. I could go on and on and on, but they're telling me I have to cut.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyway, thanks, everybody. By the way, I have to do this. My wife has told me if I stop doing this kind of thing, if I don't go on Fox News, if I don't write op-eds, that she wants a divorce because I'll drive her crazy. So I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here today and preserving my marriage. Thank you.